The love that was always there. The afternoon sun pierced through the curtains of the Morning Brew Cafe, creating a golden mosaic across the worn wooden tables. The smell of freshly ground coffee beans hung in the air like a familiar embrace. Matthew sat in his usual corner booth, the one with the view of the door, and watched Emma as she laughed at something her friend Lucy had just said. His heart tightened in a way that had become painfully familiar over the past 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days. He knew the exact count because he'd been keeping track. Not obsessively, he told himself. Just observantly. The way a meteorologist observes the weather. The way a historian observes significant dates. 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days since the first time he'd seen Emma present her architecture project at the university symposium, her hands trembling slightly as she pointed at her blueprints, her voice cracking with nervousness, but her eyes burning with passion. He had been sitting in the 3rd row, surrounded by students who were barely paying attention, and he had felt something shift inside him. A tectonic plate of the soul, a quiet earthquake that would reshape everything. "Are you even listening to anything I'm saying?" Lucy asked, waving her hand abruptly in front of his face. She was dressed in her usual work attire, a sharp blazer and perfectly pressed slacks, but her expression was anything but professional. She looked at him with that knowing, almost pitying gaze that she'd been giving him for years. Matthew blinked, tearing his gaze away from Emma. "Of course. You were talking about the new manager at your office," he stammered, trying to recover. Lucy rolled her eyes so dramatically that several nearby patrons glanced over. "That was 10 minutes ago. I'm talking about the party this Saturday. Emma's bringing Brian." She said the name like it was a curse word, her lip curling with barely concealed disdain. The name hit Matthew like a punch to the chest. Brian, Emma's boyfriend of 2 years. The man who had everything Matthew didn't. Confidence, a steady job as a corporate lawyer at one of the most prestigious firms in the city, a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, and most importantly, Emma's heart. Or at least, Emma's attention. Matthew had never been entirely convinced that Brian actually possessed her heart. He wasn't sure anyone did, not really. Emma gave pieces of herself to everyone she loved, but she always kept a small, hidden chamber locked away. Matthew liked to think that perhaps, just perhaps, he was the only one who had ever glimpsed the key. "Great," Matthew managed, forcing a smile that felt like it was made of glass. "Should be fun." Emma turned to him, her green eyes sparkling with genuine warmth. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, the way she always wore it when she wasn't at work, and a few stray curls had escaped to frame her face. She was wearing a simple sundress with tiny sunflowers on it, and she looked like she had stepped out of a summer painting. "You'll come, right, Matthew? You never go out anymore. All you do is work and study and stare at your computer screen. You're going to turn into a ghost if you're not careful." "I have that translation project due," he started, already reaching for the excuse he'd prepared in his mind. "Matthew," Emma interrupted, her voice soft but firm. The way she said his name always made his chest ache. It was gentle, like she was handling something precious. "You promised you'd stop making excuses. Remember our deal?" He remembered. 3 months ago, after a particularly bad breakup with a woman he'd been dating half-heartedly, a woman whose name he could barely recall now, a woman who had told him he was emotionally unavailable and too attached to someone else, Emma had made him promise to be more present, to stop hiding behind his books and his translations and his carefully constructed walls. She had held his face in her hands, her thumbs brushing against his cheekbones, and said, "You're my best friend, Matthew. I hate seeing you disappear. I hate seeing you fade into the background of your own life." That moment had been torture and bliss all at once. Her touch, her concern, the way she looked at him like he mattered, like his existence was important to her. He had wanted to kiss her right there. He had wanted to tell her everything. Instead, he had nodded like a fool and promised to try harder. And here he was, 3 months later, still hiding, still fading, still loving her from a safe, painful distance. "Okay," he surrendered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll come." Lucy clapped her hands together, her expression brightening. "Perfect. It's a costume party, by the way. Theme is movie characters. Brian is going as Han Solo. Emma is going as Princess Leia. They're doing a couple's costume." She said this with a pointed look at Matthew, as if to say, "See what you're up against." Matthew groaned inwardly. Costumes. Of course. Of course Brian would choose a costume that made him look like a hero. Of course Emma would play along, because that was what she did. She accommodated. She made others feel comfortable. She dimmed her own light to let others shine brighter. It was one of the things Matthew loved most about her, and one of the things he hated most about the way Brian took advantage of it. "I'll figure something out," he said, already dreading the entire affair. The party was held at a rented event space downtown, a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and string lights that made everything look like a scene from a romantic movie. The space had been decorated to look like an old Hollywood set, with cardboard cutouts of movie stars and a red carpet at the entrance. People milled about in elaborate costumes, sipping cocktails and laughing, and Matthew felt immediately out of place. He had come as Indiana Jones, a costume that required minimal effort, a brown leather jacket he'd found at a thrift store, a fedora that was slightly too big for his head, and a whip that he'd bought online and immediately regretted. It was practical, unassuming, everything Matthew tried to be. He spent most of his time near the snack table, pretending to be fascinated by the cheese platter, while secretly scanning the crowd for Emma. He spotted her almost immediately. She was dressed as Princess Leia from Star Wars, her hair in those iconic side buns, wearing a flowing white dress that made her look like she'd stepped out of a dream. She was laughing at something, her head tilted back, her face radiant. Brian stood beside her, dressed as Han Solo, his arm draped possessively over her shoulder. He was wearing a leather vest and holding a fake blaster, and he looked insufferably pleased with himself. "Classic couple's costume," Lucy whispered, appearing at Matthew's side. She was dressed as the bride from Kill Bill, yellow tracksuit and all, a plastic sword strapped to her back. Original, right? I bet they spent weeks planning this. Matthew shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "They look happy." "They look like they're trying too hard," Lucy muttered. She had never been Brian's biggest fan, and she made no secret of it. "Did you see the way he grabbed her arm when that guy from accounting tried to talk to her, like he was marking his territory?" "I didn't see that." "Of course you didn't. You were too busy staring at the cheese." Lucy grabbed his arm. "Come on, let's get you a drink. You're going to need it if you're going to survive this night." As the night progressed, Matthew found himself watching Emma and Brian from across the room. He noticed things he wished he hadn't. The way Brian's hand gripped Emma's arm a little too tightly when she talked to other men. The way he dismissed her opinions with a wave of his hand, cutting her off mid-sentence to talk about himself. The way Emma's smile seemed to falter when Brian wasn't looking directly at her, as if she was performing happiness for an audience of one. At one point, Brian wandered off to speak with some colleagues from his law firm, leaving Emma standing alone by the bar. Matthew watched her for a moment, his heart aching at the way she looked so small and vulnerable. She was swirling her drink, staring at nothing, and for just a second, her mask slipped. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the loneliness. He walked over to her before he could stop himself. "Hey," he said softly, leaning against the bar beside her. "You okay?" Emma looked up, and her face immediately brightened. It was like watching the sun come out from behind a cloud. "Matthew, I was wondering where you were hiding. I was starting to think you'd bailed on me." "I almost did," he admitted, "but I promised. And I keep my promises." "I know you do." She touched his arm gently. "That's one of the things I love about you. You're reliable. You're always there when I need you." "I'm always there when you need me," he thought. "But you never seem to need me the way I want to be needed." "How are you doing?" he asked instead, his voice careful. "Really?" Emma's smile flickered for just a moment. "I'm fine." "Why wouldn't I be fine?" "I don't know. You just seem—" He searched for the right word. "Quiet. Distracted." She was quiet for a moment, and then she sighed. "It's nothing. Brian's just been really stressed with work lately. He's been a little distant." "A little distant," Matthew repeated. He thought about all the times he'd seen Brian dismiss her, ignore her, treat her like an afterthought. "Emma, I don't want to overstep, but—" "Then don't," she said quickly, cutting him off. "I know what you're going to say. I know everyone thinks he's not good enough for me. But you don't understand. When things are good, they're really good. And he loves me. He does. He just shows it differently." Matthew wanted to scream. He wanted to shake her and say, "No, Emma, he doesn't love you. He loves having you. There's a difference." But he didn't. He bit his tongue and nodded and said, "Okay, as long as you're happy." "I'm happy," she said. And for a moment, she almost sounded like she believed it. 2 weeks later, Matthew found himself at Emma's apartment, helping her assemble a bookshelf she'd bought online. Brian was supposed to help, but he'd canceled at the last minute. Something about an important case he needed to prepare for. It was the 3rd time in a month that he'd canceled plans with her, and Matthew could see the disappointment etched into Emma's face, even as she tried to hide it. "I'm sorry you got dragged into this," Emma said, struggling with a wooden panel. She was wearing old jeans and a t-shirt, her hair tied up in a messy ponytail, and she looked beautiful in a way that made Matthew's chest ache. "I know you're busy with your translation work." "Never too busy for you," Matthew said, and immediately regretted how sincere it sounded. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Emma looked up, her expression soft. "You're always so good to me, Matthew. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd be happier," he thought. "You'd be with someone who actually sees you, who actually listens to you, who doesn't treat you like an accessory to his life." "How's Brian?" he asked instead, the question tasting bitter on his tongue. Emma's hand stilled on the bookshelf. "He's fine. Busy. You know how it is." Her voice was flat, mechanical. "Emma." Matthew put down his screwdriver and turned to face her fully. "Is everything okay?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice so small, it barely registered above the hum of the apartment's refrigerator, "Do you ever wonder if you're meant for something more? Like you're living someone else's life?" Matthew's heart hammered against his ribs. "All the time," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every single day." "I love Brian," she said, as if trying to convince herself. "I do. He's ambitious and successful, and everyone thinks we're perfect together. My parents love him. My friends love him. Lucy tolerates him, which is basically the same thing. And he's good to me. He buys me nice things and takes me to fancy restaurants and tells me I'm beautiful. But," Matthew prompted gently, "but sometimes I feel like I'm invisible around him, like I'm just an accessory, a pretty thing on his arm, like he's dating the idea of me, not the actual me, the messy, complicated, emotional me." She laughed bitterly. That's the part he can't handle. That's the part he calls too much. Matthew moved closer, his hand reaching out before he could stop himself. He placed it gently on her shoulder, feeling the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric of her shirt. You're not invisible, Emma. You're the most visible person I know. The way you light up when you talk about architecture, the way you remember everyone's birthdays, the way you laugh when you're trying not to, the way you cry during sad movies and pretend you're not. The way you... He stopped himself. He was saying too much. He was revealing too much. Emma looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition? Confusion? Longing? He couldn't tell. Her gaze dropped to his lips for the briefest second, and he felt his breath catch in his throat. "Matthew," she started. "I should go," he said abruptly, stepping back and nearly tripping over a pile of books. "I have that project due tomorrow." "But the bookshelf." "Matthew, wait!" But he was already at the door, his heart racing, his hands shaking. He didn't look back. He couldn't. If he looked back, he would say something he couldn't take back. He would ruin everything. The months that followed were a peculiar kind of torture. Brian's behavior became more overtly dismissive, more controlling, more cruel. At group dinners, he'd talk over Emma, interrupting her stories to tell his own. At parties, he'd leave her alone for hours while he networked with important people, abandoning her to make awkward small talk with strangers. Once, Matthew overheard him telling a colleague that Emma looked good on paper, but was too emotional for someone in her profession. The casual cruelty of the comment made Matthew's blood boil. Lucy kept pushing. "Say something," she'd plead, grabbing Matthew's arm whenever Brian did something particularly egregious. "Tell her how you feel. Show her what real love looks like. She needs to know that she deserves better." "It's not that simple," Matthew would reply, his jaw tight with frustration. "She has to figure it out on her own." Figure what out? That she's with a selfish jerk, who treats her like a trophy, that she's wasting her life on someone who doesn't even see her. Come on, Matthew, you're her best friend. You're supposed to protect her. I am protecting her, by not complicating things, by not making her choose between me and him, by being here, quietly, so she knows she has somewhere to turn when it all falls apart. Lucy stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You're not protecting her. You're protecting yourself. You're scared of rejection. You're scared of losing her. But guess what? You're losing her anyway. She's right there, slipping away from you, and you're just watching it happen." Matthew didn't have an answer to that, so he said nothing. But he stayed. He always stayed. He brought her soup when she was sick, even though it meant driving across town in rush-hour traffic. He helped her practice for job interviews, staying up late to quiz her on architectural theories and design principles. He proofread her proposals, catching typos and grammatical errors she'd missed. He was the first person she called when she got a promotion, and the first person she called when Brian forgot their anniversary. "I got him a watch," she had said, her voice trembling with hurt and humiliation. "A really nice one, a vintage Omega. I saved up for months, and he didn't even remember what day it was. He came home late, drunk, and he looked at the watch and said, 'What's this for?'" Matthew had wanted to say, "Leave him. Please. Just leave him, and let me love you the way you deserve to be loved. Let me show you what it feels like to be truly seen." Instead, he said, "Maybe he's just stressed with work." Even as the words left his mouth, he hated himself for defending Brian. He hated himself for being a coward. He hated himself for not being the kind of man who could just say what he meant. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday in November. Matthew was at the campus library, buried in research for a difficult translation project, a 19th century French novel that was proving to be a linguistic nightmare, when his phone buzzed. It was Emma. He answered immediately, his heart already racing. "Matthew." Her voice was barely a whisper, thin and fragile. "Can you come get me?" His blood ran cold. "Where are you? What happened?" "I'm at the old pier, the one by the lake." She paused, and he heard her sniffle. I need someone. Please. I don't know who else to call." He didn't ask questions. He grabbed his jacket and ran, leaving his books scattered across the library table, ignoring the librarian's shout of protest. He ran through the rain, his shoes splashing through puddles, his lungs burning, his heart pounding with a terror he couldn't quite name. When he arrived at the pier, he found Emma sitting on the edge, her feet dangling over the dark, choppy water. She was soaking wet, her hair plastered to her face, mascara running down her cheeks in dark streaks. In the gray November light, with the rain falling around her like a shroud, she looked utterly broken. "Emma!" He rushed to her, crouching down beside her, his hands reaching for her. "What happened? Are you hurt?" She shook her head, but her body was trembling uncontrollably, and he could see that her hands were shaking. "He left me there, at the restaurant. We were having dinner, our 2-year anniversary dinner, finally, after he forgot the actual date, and I said something about wanting to travel more, about wanting to go to Italy, about how I'd always dreamed of seeing the architecture there. And he stood up and said I was too much. He said I was draining. He said that my constant need for validation was exhausting." She laughed bitterly, a hollow sound that made his chest ache. "And then he walked out, left me sitting there like an idiot, surrounded by couples on dates, with a half-eaten meal and a bill I couldn't afford." Matthew felt a surge of white-hot rage, so powerful it nearly blinded him. "He left you? In the middle of dinner? On your anniversary?" "I tried to call him, but he turned off his phone. So I walked. I walked all the way here, through the rain, because I didn't know where else to go." She laughed again, that same bitter, broken sound. "Pathetic, right? Walking in the rain like some heartbroken movie character. I bet I looked really dramatic. I bet people were watching me and thinking, 'Look at that sad girl, so tragic.'" "Emma!" Matthew knelt in front of her, taking her cold, trembling hands in his. "Listen to me. You are not too much. You are not draining. You are not exhausting. Brian is the one who's wrong. He's the one who doesn't see you. He's the one who takes you for granted. And I am so sorry that you've spent 2 years with someone who makes you feel like you need to be smaller, like you need to dim your light to make him comfortable." Her eyes met his, and something in her gaze shifted. It was like she was seeing him for the first time, really seeing him, the way he'd always wanted to be seen. "Why are you so good to me?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Why do you always show up? Why do you always answer the phone? Why do you always drop everything for me?" "Because," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you're the most important person in my life. You've been that way since the day we met. Since that afternoon at the symposium, when you stood up in front of all those people and presented your project with trembling hands and a shaking voice, and you were still the most brilliant, most beautiful person I'd ever seen. You never told me that. I was scared. I've been scared for years. Scared of ruining our friendship. Scared of losing you. Scared that you'd never feel the same way." He laughed, a sound that was half relief, half despair. "And honestly, I'm still scared. I'm terrified right now. But I'm more terrified of living another day without you knowing the truth." Emma stared at him, her lips parting slightly, her eyes wide. "Matthew, what are you saying?" He looked at the rain, at the gray sky, at the dark water of the lake. Then he looked back at her. He was terrified. but he was more terrified of silence, more terrified of regret, more terrified of spending the rest of his life wondering what might have happened if he'd just had the courage to speak. "I'm saying I'm in love with you," he confessed, his voice raw and trembling. "I've been in love with you since we were sophomores in college, and I watched you present your first architecture project. You were so nervous, and your voice was shaking, and your hands were trembling, but you were brilliant. You were absolutely brilliant. And I thought, this is it. This is the person I want to spend my life with." Emma's eyes widened. "But you never said anything. All these years, you never said a single word." "You were with Brian. You were happy. Or I thought you were." He swallowed hard, his throat tight. "And I convinced myself that your happiness was more important than mine. That if I just stayed quiet, if I just stayed in the background, you'd eventually see what I saw. You'd eventually realize that I was here, waiting." "See what?" "That you deserve someone who actually sees you, who listens to you, who remembers your anniversaries and your dreams and your fears, who doesn't make you feel invisible." He squeezed her hands, his voice breaking. "I know I'm not a lawyer. I don't have a fancy title or a penthouse apartment or a big salary. But I would never, ever leave you at a restaurant because you said something I didn't want to hear. I would never make you feel like you were too much. I would never treat you like an accessory." Emma was crying now, tears streaming down her face, mingling with the rain. He couldn't tell if it was from sadness or relief or something else entirely. "Matthew," she breathed. "I didn't know. I had no idea. All this time, I thought you just saw me as a friend. I thought I was just your best friend's girl." "Of course you didn't know. I was too much of a coward to tell you. I was too afraid of losing what we had to risk asking for more." She reached up and touched his face, her cold fingers brushing against his cheek. Her touch was like a spark, like lightning, like everything he'd ever wanted. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice trembling. "My whole world just fell apart, and now you're telling me this. And I—" "You don't have to say anything," he cut her off gently. "I'm not telling you this, so you'll feel obligated. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the truth. Whatever you decide, I'm still here. I'll always be here. I'll always show up. I'll always answer the phone. That's not going to change." Emma leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. They stayed like that, in the rain, for what felt like an eternity. He could feel her breath on his lips, could smell the rain in her hair, could feel the trembling of her body against his. "Matthew," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I think I might be in love with you too." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotion. Emma broke up with Brian officially, and it was messy. Very messy. He showed up at her apartment drunk at 2 a.m., yelling and banging on the door, screaming accusations and threats. He called her incessantly, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to abusive to pathetic. He showed up at her office, demanding to speak with her, forcing her to hide in the bathroom until security escorted him out. "This is insane," Emma said, shaking with anger and exhaustion. "He's completely lost it. I can't believe I stayed with him for 2 years. I can't believe I let him make me feel like I was the problem." "You were trying to make it work," Matthew said gently. "That's not a weakness. That's who you are. You're loyal. You're committed. You see the best in people, even when they don't deserve it." "But I didn't see the best in him. I saw what I wanted to see. I saw potential that wasn't there. I saw a version of him that never actually existed." She laughed bitterly. "I wasted 2 years of my life on someone who was never going to change." "Emma, that's not—" "Don't," she interrupted, holding up a hand. "Don't defend me. Don't make excuses for me. I need to own this. I need to admit that I made a mistake, a huge mistake, and I need to figure out why I stayed so long." Matthew wanted to tell her why. He wanted to say, "Because you're afraid of being alone, because you think you don't deserve better, because your parents' divorce made you believe that all relationships are hard work, and that if you just try hard enough, you can fix anything." But he didn't. He just nodded and said, "Okay, whatever you need." But even after the breakup, Emma seemed distant. She'd cancel plans at the last minute, claiming she was tired or busy. She'd stare off into space during conversations, her mind clearly elsewhere. She'd laugh at jokes a beat too late. Matthew worried that he'd made things worse by confessing his feelings, that he'd complicated an already complicated situation. "She's processing," Lucy told him over coffee. "Give her space. She just ended a 2-year relationship with a narcissist. She needs time to heal." "Space is all I've given her for 3 years, Matthew muttered. "I'm exhausted. I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of being patient. I just want—" "I know what you want," Lucy said. "But you can't rush these things. She'll come around. She just needs to sort through all the garbage Brian left in her head." Matthew wasn't so sure. He started to think that maybe he'd ruined everything, that by telling her the truth, he'd pushed her away, that she'd look at him and only see the friend who'd made things awkward, the friend who'd confessed his feelings at the worst possible moment. One night, about a month after the breakup, Emma called him at 2 a.m. He was half asleep, sprawled across his couch with a book on his chest, but he answered immediately. "Matthew?" Her voice was soft, hesitant. "I can't sleep." "Me neither," he admitted, even though it was a lie. He'd been sleeping just fine until she called. "Can you come over?" Of course. When he arrived at her apartment, she was sitting on her couch in pajamas, hugging a pillow, her hair a mess, her face makeup-free. She looked fragile but determined, like a soldier about to go into battle. "I've been thinking," she began slowly, her voice careful. "About everything. About Brian. About us. About what you said on the pier." Matthew sat down beside her, keeping a careful distance. "Okay. You said you've loved me since college. I did. And you never said anything because you thought I was happy with Brian." "Correct." Emma hugged the pillow tighter, her knuckles white. "What if I wasn't happy? What if I was just going through the motions, doing what everyone expected me to do, being the perfect girlfriend, the perfect daughter, the perfect friend? What if I was so busy performing happiness that I forgot to actually be happy?" Matthew's heart started to race. "What are you saying?" She looked at him, her green eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm saying that I think I'm in love with you too. I think I've been in love with you for a long time. I just didn't know it. I was so busy trying to be the perfect girlfriend to someone who didn't deserve me that I couldn't see what was right in front of me." The world stopped. Everything went quiet. He could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the blood rushing in his ears. "Emma," he breathed, "don't say that if you don't mean it." "I can't—" "I mean it," she interrupted, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I've been thinking about it for weeks. How you're the first person I want to call when something good happens. How you're the only one who makes me feel seen. How you're the only person who's ever made me feel like I'm not too much. How every time Brian made me feel small, you made me feel big again. How I've been comparing every guy I've ever dated to you, and they all came up short." "Really?" He couldn't believe it. He was terrified to believe it. "You're not just saying this because you're vulnerable? Because you just got out of a relationship?" "Matthew." She set the pillow aside and reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I've spent 2 years with the wrong person. I've spent 3 years overlooking the right one. I'm done overlooking you. Emma, But before he could finish, she leaned in and kissed him. Her lips were soft, her touch was electric, and in that moment, everything Matthew had ever felt for her, all the longing, the ache, the unspeakable love he'd carried for 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days, was answered in a single, perfect kiss. When they broke apart, she was smiling, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes, the kind he'd been waiting 3 years to see directed at him. "Took us long enough, right?" she whispered. Matthew laughed, a sound that was half relief, half disbelief. 3 years, 5,000 coffees, 100 canceled plans, a dozen costume parties. I think that qualifies as a long time. "Better late than never," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I'm sorry I made you wait so long." "Don't apologize. You were worth the wait. You've always been worth the wait." But, as Matthew would soon learn, love was never simple. Life had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them. A week after their first kiss, Emma got a job offer she couldn't refuse. It was in Los Angeles, a senior architect position at one of the most prestigious firms in the country, working on projects that would define the skyline of a city. It was her dream job, the kind of opportunity that only came once in a lifetime. "It's a huge opportunity," she said, her voice strained with emotion. "But it's so far away. And we just started this. We just found each other." Matthew felt his heart sink. Los Angeles, 3,000 miles away, a 6-hour flight, a 3-hour time difference. It felt like an insurmountable distance. "Emma, you have to take it," he said, forcing the words out. He meant them, every single word, but saying them felt like tearing out his own heart. "What?" She stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Matthew, I can't just leave. Not now. Not when we—" "Let me finish," he said gently, taking her hands in his. "If you don't take this job, you'll always wonder what if. You'll always wonder what could have been. And I refuse to be the reason you give up your dream. I refuse to be the person who holds you back." Her eyes filled with tears. "But Matthew, we just found each other. We just started. I can't leave now. I can't—" "Take the job," he said, his voice firm. "And in the meantime, we figure out a way to make this work. We'll figure it out. Together. That's what we do. Long distance, if that's what it takes." Emma stared at him, her expression a mixture of love and despair. "You're too good to me." "Someone has to be," he said, trying to smile. "Someone has to show you how you should be treated. Even if it means I have to do it from 3,000 miles away." The next 6 months were brutal. Emma moved to LA, and Matthew stayed in Chicago, working on his translation career. They video called every night, their faces illuminated by the glow of their screens, their voices crackling through the digital divide. They sent each other care packages and wrote letters like they were in a period drama. They counted down the days until they could see each other again. But it was hard. So hard. There were nights when Matthew would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she'd find someone else. Someone who could be there for her in person. Someone who could hold her hand and take her to dinner and be present. Someone who wasn't just a voice on a phone, a face on a screen. There were nights when Emma would call him, crying, exhausted from the pressure of her new job, overwhelmed by the demands of a city that never slept. "I miss you," she'd whisper, her voice breaking. "I miss you so much it hurts. I miss your stupid jokes. I miss your terrible cooking. I miss the way you always know how to make me feel better." "I miss you too," he'd reply, his voice just as broken. "But we're almost there. Just a little longer. Just a few more months." "What if I can't do this?" she asked one night, her voice small and scared. "What if I'm not strong enough?" "You are strong enough," he said, with a conviction he didn't entirely feel. "You're the strongest person I know. You survived Brian. You survived that tumor. You can survive this." And then, 4 months into the long-distance nightmare, Matthew got a call that changed everything. "Matthew?" It was Andrew, Emma's older brother. His voice was strained, panicked. "I need you to come to LA. It's Emma." Matthew's blood ran cold. "What happened? Is she okay?" "She collapsed at work. They're at the hospital right now. They think it's something serious. A stroke, maybe. Or something with her heart. I don't know. I don't know anything. You need to come. You need to come now." Matthew took the first flight to LA. He didn't pack. He didn't even call his boss. He just ran. He ran through the airport like a madman, ignoring the stares of other passengers, his heart pounding with a terror he couldn't quite name. He spent the entire flight staring at the seat in front of him, his hands shaking, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. When he arrived at the hospital, Andrew was waiting for him in the lobby. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed. "She's in surgery," Andrew said, his voice cracking. "They found a tumor in her brain. They don't know if it's cancerous yet. They're removing it right now." Matthew felt the world tilt. The wall seemed to close in around him. A tumor? She had headaches for weeks. She thought it was stress. She never told anyone. She didn't want to worry us. Andrew's voice broke entirely. "She's so stubborn, Matthew. She's always been so stubborn. She thinks she can handle everything on her own." Matthew sat down heavily in a waiting room chair, his legs unable to support him any longer. His hands were shaking. His entire body was shaking. "She's going to be okay," he said, more to himself than to Andrew. "She has to be okay. She has to be okay." The surgery was successful. The tumor was benign, a massive relief that made Matthew collapse to his knees in the hospital hallway. But the recovery was long and painful. The surgery had been complicated, and Emma was left weak and disoriented. She couldn't remember things. She couldn't focus. She had to learn to walk again. Matthew didn't leave her side. He slept in a chair next to her hospital bed, waking up every time she moved or made a sound. He held her hand through the physical therapy sessions. He helped her eat when she couldn't lift a spoon. He whispered reassurances through the long, sleepless nights. "Your hair looks ridiculous," Emma croaked one morning, opening her eyes for the first time after surgery. Her head was wrapped in bandages, her face pale and gaunt. Matthew laughed, tears streaming down his face. "You're not exactly a beauty queen yourself right now." "Rude," she whispered, trying to smile. "I'm in a hospital bed, and you're making fun of me." "I love you," he said, the words pouring out. "I love you so much, Emma. I thought I was going to lose you. I thought—" "Hey," she whispered, squeezing his hand weakly. "I'm not going anywhere. I made you wait 3 years. I'm not about to make you wait a lifetime." Emma recovered. It was slow and frustrating and painful, but she recovered. She relearned how to walk. She relearned how to focus. She relearned how to live. And when she was strong enough, she told Matthew something that made his heart soar. "I'm moving back to Chicago." "What? But your job?" "Brian? No, I mean, my boss?" She laughed at her own mistake. "Actually, he told me that my recovery is more important than any project. He's been incredibly understanding. And you know what? Being here, in this hospital, I've had a lot of time to think. about what I really want, about what really matters. And what's that? Love, stability. You. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing his jawline. I thought the LA job was my dream, but it's not. It was a dream. It was an incredible opportunity, and I'm grateful for it. But it wasn't my real dream. My real dream is being with you. Coffee at the morning brew. Bad movies on Friday nights. Bookshelves that take forever to assemble. That's what I want. That's what I've always wanted. Matthew felt tears sliding down his cheeks, hot and unashamed. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life, she said. And after everything I've been through, the tumor, the surgery, the recovery, I've realized that life is too short to waste on anything less than what you really want. And what I really want is you, Matthew. It's always been you. The wedding was small, just family and close friends. Lucy was the maid of honor, and Andrew was Matthew's best man. Emma's parents were there, her mother crying before the ceremony even started. Brian was conspicuously absent, and no one mentioned him. It was as if he'd been erased from the story entirely. Emma walked down the aisle in a simple white dress that fell to her knees, her hair short from the surgery, her face radiant. She was using a cane, her physical therapist had insisted, but she moved with a grace and dignity that made Matthew's heart ache. I know this isn't the fairy tale we imagined, she said during her vows, her voice steady and strong. I know life threw us some unexpected curves, but through all of it, you were there. You were always there, even when I was too blind to see it, even when I was with the wrong person, even when I was 3,000 miles away, even when I was lying in a hospital bed. You never gave up on me, and that's the kind of love I want. That's the kind of love I need. That's the kind of love I'm going to spend the rest of my life returning. Matthew's voice cracked as he recited his own vows. I've loved you since the moment I saw you present that architecture project. I thought you were the most brilliant person I'd ever met. And I was right. You are brilliant and strong and resilient, and I'm so incredibly lucky that you finally noticed me. I'm so incredibly lucky that you chose me. Lucy wept openly. Andrew pretended to be tough, but dabbed at his eyes with his sleeve. And when they kissed, surrounded by the people they loved, Matthew knew with absolute certainty that he had found his forever. That all the waiting, all the pain, all the uncertainty had been worth it. That this moment, this perfect, golden moment, was what he'd been waiting for all along. 2 years later, they bought a house. A fixer-upper with a beautiful yard and a creaky porch and a kitchen that desperately needed to be gutted. They spent weekends renovating it together, covered in paint and sawdust and laughter. Why did we buy a house that needed so much work? Emma groaned, covered in paint. She was standing on a ladder, trying to reach the top of the wall, and she looked like she was ready to throw the paintbrush at him. Because you said you wanted a project, Matthew laughed. I meant an architecture project, not a demolition project. But she was smiling. She was always smiling now. The kind of smile that reached her eyes. The kind that made him fall in love with her all over again, every single day. And when they lay in bed at night, her head on his chest, his arm wrapped around her, Matthew would think about all the twists and turns that had brought them here. The years of silence, the painful confessions, the long-distance torture, the health scare that nearly took everything away, the homecoming. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been neat. It hadn't been the fairy tale either of them had imagined. But it had been theirs, completely, imperfectly, beautifully theirs. Matthew? Emma's voice was drowsy, her breathing slowing. I love you. I love you too, Emma, more than you'll ever know. And as she drifted off to sleep in his arms, her breath warm against his chest, Matthew finally understood. True love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It wasn't about being the right person at the right moment. It wasn't about big declarations or dramatic confessions. True love was about showing up, day after day, year after year. It was about being willing to wait, to fight, to sacrifice. It was about loving someone even when they couldn't love you back, and loving them more when they finally could. It was about seeing the person you loved even when they couldn't see themselves. It was about being there, quietly, persistently, unwaveringly, until they finally looked up and saw what had been in front of them all along. For years, Matthew had thought he was just a friend in the background of Emma's life, a supporting character in her story, present but unseen, a footnote in the narrative of her life. But he'd always been the main character in her story. He just hadn't known it. And now, finally, she knew it too. The end. The love of my life was right beside me the whole time. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel and comment. Which moment touched you the most in this story? I want to know your opinion.